Thank you very much for being here, and first I would like to talk more about science and then go to other topics. As far as I read, you describe yourself more as an empiricist, an experimentalist. You always worked in the lab studying cells and their life cycle, and yet such experimental studies can raise, in some cases, theoretical questions, such as the one that you addressed in your book. So, what is life? That is one of the most maybe mysterious questions of biology. So, I'd like to ask you not what is life, but how has your experimental experience shaped your understanding both of how life works and how it shaped your approach to such theoretical issues?
Well, I think I must start when I was a graduate student, actually, because I was a plant scientist. I was working on plants and fungi. And during my PhD, which is quite tough, as I'm sure you know, I decided that if you were going to do science, you should really tackle an important problem. And that's when I thought, well, the most important problem in biology is what is life. And then I began to think, what are the most important characteristics of life? And one that is critical is reproduction, because all living things reproduce. And in its simplest form, that is the reproduction of a cell from 1 to 2. That's the basis of all reproduction, and for that matter, all growth and development of all living things. So I thought this is an interesting topic, and when I finish this PhD, I will have a go at working out what controls the division of one cell to 2. Little did I know, because this is 50 years ago, that I would still be working on it, although have made quite a lot of progress since then. So why I answered your question like that is I'm an experimentalist, but have the intention of taking on an important problem with many theoretical implications. So whilst my brain is thinking in terms of theory and big ideas, I tackle it with experiments of doing things.
Maybe one of the most relevant discoveries you made could be described, and sorry if this is simplistic, as a hint to one very fascinating fact of life, that every living being is profoundly tied to every other by a profound kinship that is manifest even in the very genetic foundation of every organism. So I would like to know from you, what are the implications of this awareness, of this realization, both in the scientific field and especially in the societal and ethical dimensions?
So this is a complicated question. I can tell you how I got into this, which is that I studied this process of the reproduction of a cell from 1 to 2 in a very simple organism, a yeast that makes bread and wine and beer, and worked out roughly how it worked, and discovered the set of genes which were involved in that, which were all around a key gene, which turned out to be something called a cyclin-dependent kinase. And I just asked the question, is it possible that exactly the same control is in human beings? And this was 30 years ago. We didn't have a human genome sequence, we had nothing of that sort. But we had just made, and by we, not me, I mean the field, had just made the first human gene library. And it was made in America. The person who made it, very generous, gave it to me. And what I did is, I took a mutant yeast that was defective in this gene, so it couldn't reproduce itself, so it could not grow, and essentially sprinkled this gene library on these cells, thinking that if there was an equivalent gene in human beings, then it might rescue the defect in yeast, so that yeast would be able to grow and I would be able to see that happening and then isolate the human gene to get it back again. Now that experiment had no right to work, because humans and yeasts, they diverged maybe 1,500 million years ago. This is a big time, a very big time. Put it in perspective, dinosaurs went extinct a mere 65 million years ago. This is 1,500 million years. So it was a huge leap to think that this could possibly be the case, but it was the case. It absolutely was the case. And if you control cell division in a yeast and a human the same way, then that means everything is that we can see, all animals, all plants, all fungi, will have the same control, which has turned out to be the case. So then you said, what are the philosophical, what are the theoretical implications of that? Well, one is it confirms in a very nice way Darwin's idea of a tree of life, where we're all related. You know, the one he drew started with a single stem and then went into lots of branches and then leaves. And what it meant is that every living thing that is related on this planet, every living thing. And what I felt about that philosophically is that we are surrounded in the biosphere by all our relatives. Some of the relatives are closely related to us, you know, a gorilla, a chimpanzee, an orangutan, and some, like my yeast that I worked on, very distant. But they are all our relatives. And if we are at the pinnacle of all of this, and that's a question I'm not sure is true, but let's just assume that we are somewhere near the pinnacle, then do we not have a responsibility to care for all our relatives? You would understand that in Italy, particularly, with the strong family connections. And so there is a philosophical thing. We are related to every living thing. We should care for it.
I would like to ask you something about two hot topics for science in academia, based on your experience both as a leading scientist in a laboratory, for example, and as head of departments in the university and research centers. So first, I would like to know what is, in your opinion, the role of fundamental research? Should it be, for example, always pursuing some societal or economic impact or not? And the second question would be, do you think that fundamental research is sufficiently supported today, or what could we do to transform it for the better?
In thinking about these questions, it's really important to understand that there's a spectrum of science. There's a spectrum of science from discovering new things, sometimes called basic research. I prefer the term discovery research, actually, right through to applying it for societal good, for improving health, understanding climate change, dealing with conserving the biosphere, industry and economic growth. And they work in quite rather different ways. They have similar principles: the pursuit of truth, of respect for data and evidence, not to make things up, and these sorts of principles. But the way they operate is different and is often not understood, particularly by our political leaders, because discovery is best done by encouraging the curiosity of the scientists doing it. And you cannot do that top-down by directing, whereas applications have to be delivered top-down by identifying a societal problem, like solving cancer, for example. Now, what isn't really well understood is that if you just let scientists loose, following their curiosity, they are much more effective at discovering things than if you try and tell them and direct them what to do. Because actually, who tells them what to do? It'll be old people like me with white hair who should stop doing that. What we should be doing is encouraging the creativity of people thinking anew, about these issues. And what that means is they will discover new things. We just don't know what they will be. And they will discover new things that can be applied. So the key is this, to have discovery research that discovers things, but be very effective at capturing it whenever it finds something of useful application. And then you need a different sort of scientist who wants to pursue a particular objective. There's a metaphor here that I stole from somebody, but it's a good metaphor. If you have your resources, if you're building a building and you put all your resources into building it very high without putting resources in the foundation, it will eventually fall over. Discovery is building a foundation. Application is building higher. You need both, and they both have to be encouraged. If you try and direct discovery research, it won't work. If you try and do applications in this anarchistic way of just letting people do what they want to do, it won't work. You need the whole spectrum. So the answer is we need a proper balance. Now, what happens in the real political world? The politicians often are very close to business. All they think about, not all politicians, by the way, but many think of it in terms of applying it to solve certain problems. They forget the discovery. And so we need to educate politicians about what I just said, so that the whole spectrum is in fact delivered. But we have to be careful, because sometimes they run away with just applications, not realizing that the whole edifice, the building, will collapse because there's no foundations underneath it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Let's hope that politicians learn how to manage this complexity. By the way, we are diving into politics, so I would like to ask you something about the fact that you often express your political views, your personal opinions. And I really appreciate when scientists do this, because I think this helps break that glass wall that sometimes seem to separate the scientific world from the general society. And so I would like to ask you, what is the role that scientists play or should play in society, in the public mainly?
Well, scientists, they have a responsibility for society as a whole. We are actually supported by society as a whole, supported to increase knowledge and capture useful knowledge when we can. Sometimes my colleagues are arrogant about that. They say we should be supported just because of what we are. But we always have to remember we are part of society, we're supported by society. And that's, I think, really important for this. And that also means that we should be translating what science means for society, indicating what might be possible for applications, indicating how we're contributing to culture and civilization, which is of course something that can get lost in all of this, and also identifying when there are issues that maybe are uncomfortable, that need to be debated in society as a whole. I'm a biologist on the edge of biomedicine, and our knowledge of how human life works brings up problems of this sort quite often. When does life begin? Important for abortion. When does life end? Which is important for when you terminate, whether you should terminate a life. When is it proper to interfere with how a human body is working, the genes or anything else? When is it not? Now, scientists don't actually have all the solutions to these problems, but they have the knowledge that is relevant to those solutions. And the solutions will differ from community to community, from society to society. So different parts of the world will have different solutions. What may be acceptable in one place may not be in another. That we just have to accept. That's just how it is. So the role of the scientist is to identify issues that are potentially important, and particularly if they're contentious, to contribute what their knowledge is, and to do that early on so that there can be debate about it in society as a whole. It is not the purpose of a scientist alone to solve those problems. It is this complex engagement between those with knowledge and those of the particular scientific issue, but maybe not other knowledge that is needed, the political knowledge, the ethical knowledge, the moral knowledge. And then if you have that sort of open debate, I think you can deal with these complex problems in a more satisfactory way.
I only have a final question.
Yes.
That is, since we are a university magazine, I would like you to give some piece of advice to students and early career researchers that are trying to pursue the academic career. And in some interviews I read from you, you often talk about how your career path was not linear and not always successful, but you had moments of defeats, moments of breakdown, and I would like to know how you managed to cope with failure and what has it taught you, and what advice?
I mean, let's go personal. I mean, I do not come from an academic family, a scientific family. I come from a working class family, not one that was trained in the university. Nobody stayed at school in my family after 15, so except for me, and so that did mean something to me actually. Because it meant that I'm in some ways quite close to normal people, because I was brought up in a normal family, and that might be one reason why I say some of the things I've already said. I've never quite lived in that ivory tower that some of my colleagues have done so. But what it also meant was that it could be a bit tough, and I failed examinations often. I couldn't get into a university. I failed exams to get into the university, and sometimes a little later I couldn't get a job either, and I had to struggle in all these different ways. But actually it taught me to be resilient in that situation, because when you're a research scientist you fail quite often. If you're at the frontiers of knowledge, you're bound to fail. If you're a bit further back and doing what people sort of mostly understand, maybe failure is less often. If you're at the front, you will fail. I still have 5-6 students, and I always, when they start with me, they have never failed an exam in their life, never, not like me. And I say, within a month of here, you will be failing what you're doing, and I will help you, but you will be failing. You just have to accept that. This isn't being clever at writing a clever answer for an exam. This is trying to understand reality, and it can be tough to do that. So having resilience is really important, together with curiosity that we've already spoken about. So if there's students out there wondering about what they should be doing, I mean, they need to recognize that it is tough, but you can, if you have the right attitude, overcome the problems and difficulties. And the reality is, it's an amazing career. You'll probably never get rich. I mean, so forget about that. There's very few that do. But you are paid all your life, at least I was, to pursue my curiosity and to teach people, which is very enjoyable too. But I was following my curiosity. I've been enormously privileged. I'm not sure always my colleagues realise how privileged we are. Society pays us to pursue our curiosity. They would like something back, something that would be useful, but sometimes you will produce something and sometimes not, but you're still tolerated as long as you do high quality work, at least in most countries. So it's important to recognise your privileged position because it is, and it's a mark of civilization. I'm not criticizing it, but we need to have the humility to recognize that we're privileged. So if you're thinking about a career like this, it's wonderful, but it's tough. You're likely to fail. You're unlikely to be very rich. But if you have the passion to want to understand things, and if you have this intense curiosity to investigate that, then it's the most wonderful profession to have.